As you guys probably know, I already reviewed the new ASUS TUF A15 and the ROG G15 laptops recently, so I think it's time to step it up a notch with a bit more of a premium alternative. So this is the brand new ASUS ROG Zephyrus M15, a laptop which ASUS claims is great for gaming thanks to some very powerful new GPU options. It is great for creators with the option of getting a calibrated 100% Adobe RGB 4K display, as well as very portable with a weight of less than 2 kilos. But the GPU side is especially interesting, as this laptop will come with the new Nvidia Super Mobile GPU, so either an RTX 2060 Supermax Q or the RTX 2070 Supermax Q that I actually have right here. Now, this is a pre-production sample, so some specs and details aren't really clear yet, but I do know it will come with either a 6 or an 8-core 10th gen Intel Core CPU. It will go up to 32 gigs of RAM, up to a 1TB SSD, and aside from this color-focused 4K IPS display, there will be some pure gaming options like a 240Hz Full HD model. Now, pricing isn't exactly known yet either, but you should probably expect these to start at around $1,600 to $1,700 and go up to around $2K or a bit more depending on the specs you need. So let's check it out. Let's go. This video is brought to you by Corsair and their K95 RGB Platinum XT mechanical keyboard. The new K95 features a beautiful aluminum design, cherry MX switches, dedicated media buttons with an extra row for dedicated macro keys, extra durable PBT caps, and a very comfortable and soft wrist rest. Check it out using the links in the description below. The new M15 is definitely thin for a notebook with these specs. It is just under 2 centimeters thick and weighs a bit under 2 kilos. Build quality feels quite good thanks to a mostly metal frame. However, the panels are actually plastic. I personally don't mind that, as it's not that sensitive to fingerprints and it's easy to clean. And the little prismatic dot design is actually quite nice and something different. If it's not your thing, don't worry, there will be a clean black version as well. But I think it's surprising to see this less is more direction ASUS is taking with their new models. They are sleek, still have some details to set them apart, but still manage to look very professional. Connections are pretty good with a Type-C Thunderbolt 3 header with DisplayPort support and 2 USB 3 ports on the right side. And on the left side we have an Ethernet connection, HDMI 2.0 and a fast USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A port. Now the headphone jack and the microphone header are separate because ASUS put a high-end ESS DAC in there for better audio quality. There is no SD card reader, which I find a bit of a shame on a laptop that also has a strong creator focus and a screen to back that up. It is very easy to open the laptop with one hand, and the materials on the inside feel really good as well, thanks to what ASUS calls a soft touch skin. Now, most of the inside is not sensitive to fingerprints, but the glass on the touchpad actually is. And even though the whole laptop is thin and light, the flex in the chassis is minimal, giving it a nice and a sturdy feel when you're working on it. Typing or gaming on the keyboard feels great. There is an okay amount of travel, a good tactile feel, and the keys aren't too light. And I think a bit of resistance in a key is just nicer to work on. The precision touchpad with glass surface is nice, it's smooth and accurate, and a clear step up from the G15. I personally prefer the physical buttons from the A15, but both tapping the touchpad or pressing the corners just works well. So onto the CPU performance, where we see Intel's new i7-10750H where we would expect it to be. Single core performance is good, and so is multi-core performance, even though it does hurt to see cheaper alternatives with the Ryzen 7 4800H do that better. No wonder, considering that this is a 6-core CPU while the Ryzen 7 has 8 cores. So if raw CPU performance is important to you, it will make sense to consider an M15 with an 8-core i7-10875H instead. Don't forget that even these 6 cores are more than capable at most creative workloads, including photo editing and 1080p video editing. Of course, like many of you, I'm definitely wondering what an M15 with a Ryzen CPU could have been like, but the reality is that for many things we do with our laptops, it really doesn't matter much. If we look at games, for example, we see that this 6-core 12-thread CPU isn't really holding the GPU back. We see solid 60 FPS plus performance in AAA titles on very high settings. In fact, Nvidia's new 2070 Supermax Q is actually doing slightly better than the previous generation RTX 2070 GPUs that were not Max Q. So, gaming on this laptop is actually excellent. I didn't really talk about this in my recent GeForce RTX laptop reviews, but I do want to talk about Nvidia's DLSS 2.0 now that it's slowly making its way into some games. So, typically on a 4K laptop like this, I would leave the display on a 4K resolution but run the game on 1080p instead. This mostly looks good, but it was never quite the same as native. But now with DLSS 2.0, you can do two interesting things. Now, first, you can use DLSS to render a game on 1080p and upscale it to 4K instead. You do lose a bit of performance, but the image quality is a lot better. In fact, running Control on medium settings and upscaling it to 4K looks way better than running it on 1080p on high settings. If you prefer performance over image quality, you can set the display to 1080p in Windows before running the game, which kind of allows you to use DLSS upscaling from an even lower resolution. And it is almost impossible to see quality differences between 1080p native and 720p upscaled, especially when you're kind of in the middle of some action going on, but the boost in frame rates is actually huge. Now, obviously, DLSS 2.0 is only available in very few titles at the moment, but it does show a lot of promise for gaming laptops like this one. When it comes to battery life, in light office use, the 76 watt-hour battery actually performs quite well, lasting around 7 hours there, or 5 hours 40 minutes of just watching Netflix. And that is actually a reasonable battery life. Now, you should avoid using heavy applications on the go, because if I run PC Mark 8 that does use the GPU from time to time, it will actually run out in mediocre 2.5 hours. While that might sound, a bit disappointing, remember that this model has the 4K display, and high resolution panels almost always negatively affect your battery life. Still, this 4K panel might actually be one of the big reasons to consider this laptop, as it's actually one of the better displays I've seen in laptops recently. It offers a nice 381 nits of peak brightness, both a 100% sRGB and 100% Adobe RGB color gamut, and viewing angles are well above average. Contrast is excellent too for an IPS panel at 1544:1, and many of the other results like gray balance and white point are excellent as well. ASUS just made one really odd choice here, and that is that while the screen is calibrated almost perfectly for an Adobe RGB workflow, there is no sRGB mode or profile. So if I run my standard sRGB tests, it shows some oversaturation. Now, considering a majority of applications actually use the sRGB color space, ASUS really should add a profile for that instead. Thankfully, considering how capable this display is, calibrating it yourself for sRGB should not be a problem at all. For thermal performance, I tested both the default balanced performance mode as well as the turbo mode. Playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is a CPU and a GPU heavy title, the CPU remains at a comfortable 86 degrees with the GPU sitting at 82 degrees in the default mode, which is pretty good, and at 48.2 decibels it is actually definitely audible, but it's about the same as most gaming laptops, I would say. Switching to turbo mode, we see clock speeds improve quite a bit as the CPU pushes its limits at 93 degrees, but it definitely starts sounding turbo at 54 decibels. Now, it is definitely worth for gaming, so make sure you put on a headset. Looking at a pure CPU workload, we can see pretty good thermals in both turbo and performance mode, with the CPU staying under 80 degrees in both modes. 45 decibels really isn't that bad for a thin laptop doing some hard work, and I think both profiles are viable, giving you the choice between a bit more power and noise or keeping it a bit more balanced. Unlike the G15, there is no fan stop during light use, although that too might be a pre-production setting. In any case, idle and light use noise levels are quite low, so not something you should really worry about. The M15 is pretty similar to the G15 when it comes to opening it up. Remove a couple of screws and the bottom comes off easily. Just remember to keep the screws nicely sorted as they have different lengths. It is easy to maintain this machine, and we can easily clean the fans and replace the battery, for example. You can also add a second M.2 SSD, and this second slot only supports PCIe SSDs, but technically you could move the stock SSD over, as the first slot supports both PCIe and SATA SSDs. As expected in a thinner model, half the memory is socketed on the top, with the other half being soldered on the rear side of the motherboard. Now, soldered RAM is an understandable choice, as there is clearly lack of space on a thin laptop like this, but it does mean that you should buy an M15 with enough memory for your current and future use right away. Now, the Wi-Fi chip is soldered as well and placed directly under a heat pipe, which feels a bit odd. Now, it shouldn't be a problem. I had no Wi-Fi issues even when stressing the system for a long time. But if we look at the G15, for example, we see that there ASUS used the same space to put a replaceable Wi-Fi chip. Now, this too could be changed in the final version, and since it is the latest Wi-Fi 6 chip, there should be really no reason to replace it in the next few years, but having an option to do so is always better. The SSD actually performs quite good too. Kudos to ASUS for not cheaping out there, and while the speakers look physically the same as on the G15, audio performance here is a lot better. Now, I don't know if it's because of the new ESS DAC or better drivers, but the end result is good, and that is what counts. But the webcam quality is actually pretty bad, considering there is no webcam. I know some of you love that, while others hate it, so you just have to decide that for yourself. So that's the new ROG Zephyrus M15, a laptop that doesn't really do anything super crazy, like add a second screen or open up a bit for extra performance or last 10 hours on a battery, but it is a really nicely balanced all-around machine. It is really thin and light, it has a ton of power, especially with that RTX 2070 Super. The keyboard and the touchpad are really nice to work on, and the 4K IPS display is just excellent. Now, I know some of you will be disappointed that there are no AMD versions, but the simple reality is that if you want a stronger GPU than an RTX 2060, Intel is your only option, at least for now. Now, I don't know what the exact prices will be, but if you're just after getting as much as gaming performance for your money as possible, there probably will be other RTX 2070 Super alternatives at a lower price point. And it is better to look into models with either a 240Hz or a 300Hz Full HD display instead. But this M15 is more a machine for people that really value a better display with better colors and higher resolutions than cheaper gaming panels have to offer, which can be good for both creative work and that epic AAA immersion gaming. Now, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below what do you think about this laptop and about this review. Don't forget to subscribe, give me thumbs up, and see you in the next one, guys. Bye!